And my story today comes out of Law 360, and Health and Human Services released its first annual report under the Medical Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Expansion Act. A lot to say. Now, Biden signed this in December of 2022, and one of its targets was the DEA's foot dragging. And they require the DEA to respond within 60 days or ask for more information. And for those of you who don't know what the DEA has been doing since they got started in 1971 or 72, whenever it was, is that you file an application for something to do with Schedule 1, and they'll sit on that shit till you drag them to court and force them to do something. So the purpose of this act was to get the DEA off their ass and make them process, especially Schedule 1 drugs, which cannabis is, okay? And so it also required that once a year, the HHS give a report. So this is stories about the report. And it mentions Kevin Sabet in there and Sam as, trying to take credit for getting this bill passed and help drafting it, and it serves all our purposes. That was before they moved to reschedule. I don't know what Sabet feels about this right now. But as I read this, my first thought was, no shit, Sherlock. The DEA, they didn't use the DEA specifically, but they say Schedule 1 status of marijuana has made it very difficult to do research. The response is, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. We've been dealing with this since the DEA first got started. And this report, as I read it last night, it read more and more like fear tactics. There are questions they were asking, but it's more and more fear tactics. And they're critical of the DEA not allowing enough Schedule 1 product to be produced legally under a Schedule 1 license. And one of their suggestions is that we go out to these states where dispensaries are getting product from cultivators, and we streamline a license so that those cultivators can produce some product that you find on the shelves in your typical medical or recreational use state, and give that to researchers to use. They also, fear-mongering part of this is that they're still trying to make a connection between psychotic disorders and using weed, women using weed while they're pregnant and having these problems. And rather than emphasizing that this is just not that big a problem, they continue to fear-monger here. And as we saw in one of the earlier stories, bringing up pregnancy and using weed is a way to fearmonger, and so is trying to connect psychotic disorders with the use of weed. Going clear back to the Indian Hemp Commission report in the 1890s, they went to insane asylums and found hash eaters who were, falling to the moon and just psychotic. Okay? They didn't do any scratching and sniffing. They just noted that it's there. And so recently, and I would say in the last 20 to 30 years, they have tried to make a connection between the use of cannabis, especially high potency cannabis, and the onset of dissociative or psychotic disorders. And I've been in the middle of screaming matches with psychiatrists about this who are conservative and scared and don't want anybody to use it, so they bring out the fear mongering. And when they first did the statistics for these dissociative and psychotic disorders back in the 50s, few people were smoking weed. It just wasn't a big thing in the 1950s. Now, a lot of people, and the numbers are 20, 30% actively use cannabis, and the rates of schizophrenia, other dissociative disorders haven't gone up. And this is the pissing match I had with these psychiatrists. You're telling me it causes this, but the numbers haven't gone up, and you can damn sure bet that the use of marijuana has gone up. So the connections aren't there. And Melanie Dreyer back in the 80s longitudinally studied women in Jamaica who were smoking weed and they're pregnant. All the kids met their benchmarks. There was no evidence that you're producing kids who can't add with all their fingers and toes out. Okay, it just wasn't happening. And they don't try the teratogenic because kids aren't being born with, an eye on their forehead and, a hand coming out of their shoulder. So it just struck me that although they said from the beginning that marijuana is not nearly as problematic as other substances like alcohol and some of these other Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs, and then went on to just throw so much fear mongering out there. Now, I like their suggestion to try and streamline getting some of these local producers so you can actually study the products, because I've seen the stuff that came out of the University of Mississippi. LV Musica is a friend of mine. She's been over with her weed. We cut it open, looked at it, and it's like, I wouldn't have sold this shit in the 70s, breaking up bricks of dirt Mexican weed. It was just horrible stuff. I don't trust the government to produce it, and they've made it so difficult to get a Schedule I producing license that you end up taking what you can get. Anybody who ever followed Sue Sisley trying to get approval to do phase 3 studies on PTSD and weed, that it just took years. She got fired from a job. It was horrendous. Oh, the problem here is the DEA. Okay? And they need to be bitch slapped and pushed back in their place. And I don't see that happening anytime here real soon. And the rescheduling, there's already a lot of pushback against it, and they want their 5-part test. HHS wants a 2-part test, and we may get a chance to see about the Supreme Court's reining in these administrative agencies and whether it's going to have an effect on the DEA. So I'm going to throw this back at you guys for some comment here, but I just shook my head. It just seems like the same old fear-mongering nonsense coming out of the government. You guys got to say.
Man, Dale, I mean, yep. that's what I'm hearing a lot. And, in your first parts where you talk about, the DEA is going to drag their feet until you take them to court. And I think, that creates such a big expense for a lot of these people that are just trying to apply and to get this type of certification from them. That is just, it turns a mountain into a molehill.
Well, Normal sued him. I mean, Keith Stroop was the first to sue him.
Yep.
I mean, he's going to be out at the Emerald Cup out here if people want to come and meet him. But he started back in the 70s suing the DEA for foot dragging, and it just didn't get any better. And then in the 80s, Dr. Taskin at UCLA, his opinion was that smoking weed is safer than breathing the air in LA, and the DEA jerked all of his funding. He never got another chance to do any research because they didn't want anything positive coming about weed. Mm-hmm. They want to say now they've changed their stripes, but I believe them as far as I can throw their ugly asses, because I've dealt with them for decades. And no, they're going to do everything they can to drag. And when I read this report, they've got support inside the government, and doctors are just sissies. They are scared to do anything. So they're going to say, oh, you shouldn't smoke weed when you're pregnant. Well, they'll give you something for your nausea that causes your child to have, 3 arms, but you can't smoke weed. Right. It's just nonsensical. And I've been in and around the medical community for a long time, and I'll tell you, they are a bunch of pussies. They do not want to buck the system, and the ones that do, like my ex-wife, we got a nice trip to the Federal Hilton for a measure of our bucking the system. So doctors just don't want to do it, and we need them on our side as our advocates. And a lot of people are using this. It's an antiemetic for hyperemesis gravitorum, which is I'm puking my guts out because I'm pregnant. And the downside doesn't seem to be there. Oh, we're afraid it might cause. Yeah, but what the fuck does it actually do? That's the problem I have with them. It's the same thing with all the vape cartridges may have stuff in it. Is it actually a problem? Mm-hmm. Is it actually one? Let's identify it and target it. And if it's not a problem, stop fear-mongering about it. There's a lot of things to be afraid of out there. And, some woman that's puking her guts out, taking a couple hits to settle her stomach down. I don't know that that's one we should be too afraid of here.
Right.